what I was struck by most in the topical conversations that I had: change management, customer adoption, product concept. Top three. AI, great, understandable, lots of productive conversations around it. What really matters? Change management, customer adoption, product concept.
One of the biggest opportunities for folks who work in digital is you have access to the single greatest asset to your company's long-term success, which is the clearest, highest resolution, most consistent pool of data about what your customers want from you than anybody in the company.
I think friction is the factor. Friction coefficient is always higher for the online than the offline. What you have to do is get to a point where online becomes where there's less friction. Then customers will adopt. Then customers will continue to use it. They'll continue to engage.
I don't think e-commerce should ever sit within IT. The role of IT is to implement and to design and scale. But the business operation itself, the activity and the function, needs to be removed from the technical strings.
Fear is a interesting thing because because there's just so we're just normally just bound by fear and the things we do. I don't want to. I don't know what I'm going to say first to the guy. I don't know how I'm going to I don't know how I'm going to talk to them when I talk to them. I don't know if I'm good enough for what they're doing. They're probably already handling this stuff. I don't need to handle it. Fear drives so much of what we do too, doesn't it?
And then you get in front of the client or the prospect and you start talking to them about what the current state of their situation is. And you were like, I forgot what it was like to be like this far behind. Yeah. Like that has absolutely been there. I think this is actually something we can maybe dig into a little bit. It's interesting how in the world of B2B e-commerce, right, a lot of attention gets paid to those companies that are out in front, right, that are the first 2 to 3 runners in the marathon, the Grangers, the McMaster Cars, the Motion Industries, the Sonopars, those folks who have been investing in technology, but also people and processes for years and years. And it's easy. And those are the folks who get the case studies written. And those are the folks who get the articles written. And those are the folks who get invited on stage at events to talk about how successful their initiatives have been. But that's not 99% of the companies that are out there trying to figure out e-commerce. They are the outliers. And there are a lot of folks out there who are still like, man, wait, you mean I need something? I can't just use my ERP to run my website? I need a platform? What? There's an awful lot of folks like that still out there.
I was struck by at B2B Online. I was struck by this. I actually was struck by it a lot earlier than this, but it was kind of a reminder to me while I was there. I came back from Salsify and came back in. My first question and my biggest, personal fear was I was no longer relevant, right? That had passed you by, 5 years. 5 years had passed. I know you were hoping that I would pass by. But the fear was was I passed by and is it relevant and things like that. And I remember my first keynote, I had the opportunity to do it and I changed it up from, it's something new. And in the middle of it, I did a little thing on change management and then I did the rest of it. Right. So it was, and it was good. It was a good presentation on innovation and the future of whatever. And then afterwards, everybody was like, hey, that was really good. I really enjoyed this and this. I really wish you would have spent time on that change management stuff. One after another people. And it's like, wait a minute. So let me just test that out with you. And so I told them a couple of things that I had been saying since 2010, right? And they're like, yeah, that would have been perfect. I could have sat there and just listened to that for 2 hours if you would have talked about that. And I realized,
I talked about the wrong thing.
We're in the same spot. Yeah. No, but then going to B2B online, I think what I was struck by most in the topical conversations that I had about what was important to people, and as we talked about the sessions and we talked about the topics, and what I was struck by was everybody was change management, customer adoption, product content, top three. AI, great, understandable, lots of productive conversations around it. What really matters? Change management, customer adoption, product content.
Yeah. Yep. I will echo that 1,000-fold. I cannot remember this many speakers on stage talking about the importance of product content. Conversations that I just had in between sessions with people talking about the fact that they're really finally trying to wrestle the issue of product content. And even in like the social events, like product content, it was so refreshing.
Yeah.
As somebody who has made product content the better part of my life for the last, 10, 11 years, to hear it coming. And this is the important thing, coming not just from the PIM companies, not just from the agencies, but coming from the practitioners, people who were saying, yeah, we were trying to figure out this, like why it wasn't working, why people weren't buying on. But then we were just like, oh yeah, the content that we were using to create our digital experience.
So is this did it feel like this was the self-awareness step of, 12 steps program where?
Yeah, I mean, possibly. I think it's finally, when the practitioners start talking about it, that I think was the biggest difference this year for me, is like they were really like,
as a fellow product data nerd,
we are legion.
You don't have to sell me on this. I believe wholeheartedly that product data affects everything. And I lately have been using the phrase in talking with clients, you have major data models that essentially transform your business. You have customer, you have product, and personally, I think those are probably the two biggest ones I see in terms of affecting transactional. Obviously, you have supplier, you have transactional data, but things that you can curate and manicure and get strategic on. I actually find customer and product being the two, and it's funny you say, customer adoption, Justin, because the product or the customer data model and the product data model, when those two mature and get to the point where you can leverage them against each other, that's where adoption really starts to run. And at least in my experience, I've seen leveraging your product data model across your customer is where adoption happens.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that your product data model will get you to a certain point in terms of the capabilities around what you can do. Like I talk about the 5 C's of product content, right? The first 4 are all about the product itself. It's got to be correct. It's got to be complete. It's got to be consistent, and it's got to be clear. The 5th C, which is contextualized, that's the part that you have to do to get all of this talk that's been happening around personalization to actually start to happen. You can't personalize your experience for a customer if you don't know anything about that customer. If you don't know what their industry they're in, if you don't know where they're located, if you know what kind of applications or what kind of processes they have in their facility, there's nothing to personalize it around.
I will say that sounds daunting in a way, even what I'm proposing. It sounds daunting, but what's interesting is it all starts with one step forward. Looking at the product data model, or looking at the customer data model, and to your point about industry, that's probably, if you don't capture industry, maybe that's where you start.
Sure.
And it'd be as simple as, if you have a customer list, which you do, Now, what data are you going to tie to that? And you can get into locations, you can get into account structure, you can get into all of those, but probably very simply and at such a high practical level is adding industry. And that industry then is your tie-in using your transaction data, your invoice data, to your product taxonomies. And that is where you can start leveraging those two data models together, even as very simply. And many companies do it, but learning how to complete that out and make a plan behind it is so helpful for just adoption. I was just talking to a third-party company today who is trying to leverage that very thing of product suggestions and kind of like a CRM boost of, hey, we know you're selling to this type of customer. They're not buying these types of products. And it's as simple as tying, well, we know that this cluster of customers in this industry buys this cluster of parts with these categories. And you could even then leverage, oh, well, these are our lead parts in these categories. Go take it to this customer, to the contextualization part. And it is right. Feeds into your fifth C.
I'm interested. I want to jump to Jay because I learned something new from you, Jay. But a perfect example of this, Sam, is that like in the medical industry, you're selling to nursing homes and you're selling to hospitals, right? And surgical rooms. So Medline back in the day, they sold drapes. And there's two kinds of drapes they sold. They sold surgical drapes and they sold drapes like that went into nursing homes. And so if you were a nursing home signing in and searching drapes, you wanted the first drapes you wanted to show up were drapes, like curtain drapes. And if you were a surgical room, you wanted surgical drapes to be shown first. Otherwise, you'd be scrolling through, thousands of drapes. And only industry and customer and a knowledge of that would have been able to relate that personalization. That's just kind of search result personalization or customization. That makes it interesting. I learned, we can stay on this topic, but I learned from Jay something interesting. Jay and I were at a party for a vendor, and I think it was you, Jay, that told me that customer CDPs, because it's customer data, what's P? Platform, yeah. Okay, customer data platforms don't have customer at the account level. Most of them don't.
No.
So it's all user-based.
Yeah. And this is because of Flywheel, this is the rabbit hole that I jumped down about 18 months ago and have been spending a lot of time with since then, because the reality is that nobody's talking about customer data. And it's something I think we all need to start talking about because, in terms of just some of the things we talked about here, segmentation, low-hanging fruit, right? But at the end of if you start at the end and work backwards, the reality is that you only have personalization, you only have relevance, contextualization, whatever you want to call it. You only have that if you have organized data, right? And so that's the problem. The problem is, where is the data? How will you organize it? And how will you create events and other things that will support campaigns? And so, yes, the most CDPs are at a user level. They're not at an account-based level. So I think I may have finally found an answer to this, but it's taken a lot of digging.
Yeah, it's because they're all coming from the consumer goods space. They're all coming from B2C. Yeah. They were designed
makes sense
to track the behavior of a consumer.
Yes, and it's programmatic, right? So in B2C, right, essentially the entirety of the interaction that we have with the customer is online. So that's the only thing that really matters. That's the only thing we need to organize. That's the only thing we need to create triggers around. The only thing we need to have data to support, right? This is, again, another area where B2B is so different, because where is the most relevant data in B2B? I would argue it's in the ERP. It's in the transactional data from the last 5, 10, 20 years of interaction with customers, right? That's where the answers lie, or at least in terms of our using data to answer some of those questions. And so right off the bat, you have a major difference between B2B and B2C.
See, and I would say that it's funny you mentioned that. I would agree with you. I think that where the historical, the historical records typically lies in the ERP. I would say that for most B2B companies, if you would ask them where it should be, they would see it should be in the CRM.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sort of like, the elephant in the room. Because I think about, there is this sort of Venn diagram of the features and functionalities that you see in a CDP in terms of facilitating targeting and segmentation and all of that, like the ability to ingest live fire behavior into a system and quickly tune the experience to reflect it. It's the wonderful thing that CDPs can do.
Right.
But the thing about the CRM is that is where we can, again, B2B companies should be able to track and account for all of the other. Yes, we should be able to track all of the procurement and the purchases and the orders that people are placing. But in the CRM is where things like conversations, meetings, the non-transactional
quotes
events happen. Quotes, absolutely.
Quotes oftentimes happen in the CRM first. So no, yeah, right. And I didn't mean to disclude CRM, but you're absolutely right to bring it up.
Yeah,
but I think again that to the point, CRM, ERP are both, essentially outside of e-commerce, right? They're not online engagements, right? And so just having those two things that have true relevance in terms of contextualization, in terms of relevance to the customer, and data is how we explain the customer. Data is how we explain who we're talking to, how we're going to shape the messaging and all that stuff. That's the way it needs to be going forward. And so having those two non-web repositories of customer data right off the bat is a very big difference between what most CDPs and what most technology that's been built to date has had to deal with.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's so important in B2B to gather and collect buyer behavior data around who the real customer is. Because most of the search and merchandising platforms that exist out there today are still largely machine learning based, right? I'm going to aggregate all the behavior that this buyer does, and I'm going to use that to be predictive about what I think they're going to do in the future. And so the more data you can get in to feed into and identify the trends, the better off you are. So that's why it's so important that roll-up be a part of any technology solution that if you're a B2B company, you're looking to consider. I don't care what one individual buyer in the maintenance department of a 3M plant in Alexandria, Minnesota happens to be buying. I care a lot. I mean, I do care, but what is really valuable to me is knowing what all 5 of those buyers are buying collectively. And then knowing who they all are and that they all operate within this department, this entity, this customer, and being able to then market to all of them so that they're all getting the same deals and they're all seeing the same things, because they're going to talk about whatever we share with them via this, this campaign. Why wouldn't we want to base that data off of the collective behavior?
Well, you have to. You have to. If the churn of those buyers happens a lot potentially. They switch lines easily, so that transition between buyer to buyer in terms of what they're buying changes so often.
Yep.
And if you don't have that, that just makes it more painful for your customer every time that happens, which is outside of your control.
Yep.
To the point where that becomes complaints then and service issues.
Right.
from the customer.
Right. You get a new person coming into that department. If you can quickly recognize that they are part of this larger entity and immediately tune our campaigns to reflect the fact that it's the group mentality. Like, suddenly I'm creating campaigns based on nothing. So then suddenly the new person comes into this department, sees the campaigns that we're giving to them, not knowing that they're participating in this collective behavior. The offers we're giving don't look like they're relevant. So this new buyer then, he hears all of his colleagues talking about what a great job XYZ, Sam's House of Safety is doing in terms of like, oh, I got this great email promotion. I was going to order that anyway. This new person looks at it and goes like, man, they're trying to sell me fasteners. That's not what I need. Like there is you know what it is? Like the offline sales methodology of B2B is all about, we know your business. We know what you need. We know what you're using. And so if you create a technology stack that doesn't serve the purpose of recreating that feeling of, oh, they know my business, they know what I need, they know what I'm doing, you're putting that digital relationship in as much risk as you would be if your salesperson went in and was just like, went into a Ford plant and was talking about all the great stuff happening in aerospace.
Here's another interesting conversation I had. So I had a bunch of conversations around careers, about individuals and their careers and progression and things like that. There's a bunch of takeaways from that. But here's a conversation I had, and I followed up with a conversation with this person and their CEO, which is a fascinating conversation. The conversation basically said, my CEO doesn't believe that e-commerce is actually easier for our customers to use. And I said, well, what do you think about that? And when they actually answered it truthfully, the truthful answer was, yeah, I don't think it's easier for them to use. Because today they can text something over to a friend, to their branch manager, or like a phone call is easier, like the steps. And it wasn't even that improving e-commerce was going to improve that, although there was part of that would improve it. It was that they fundamentally didn't build something for the customer. Mm-hmm. They made an e-commerce site. Mm-hmm. And they didn't fundamentally build something that would actually make it easier. And so when I got on the phone with the CEO later, I said, when I buy from Amazon every day, I don't buy because Amazon convinced me to buy from them. Mm-hmm. I don't buy because Amazon walked me through a customer adoption funnel to get me to adopt their platform. I buy because it's easier, in every way easier for me. Mm-hmm. And every part of it is easier. If any part of it was not easier, I would go somewhere else, 100%. And not to get on a consumerization topic, but that idea of like, there are parts of your business that could be easier through digital if you work back from first principles. And we had this whole conversation about first principles of the problem often is that we've created an e-commerce site instead of creating digital tools to help your customer do their job easier. That may or may not include e-commerce. I don't know. No. Like, you work back from first principles from your customer and their job. Then you tell me if it's going to include e-commerce or not. I can't answer that for you. It changed the whole conversation with the CEO because the CEO got 100% on board with building digital tools for the customer to help them do their job easier. Mm-hmm. Like 100%. He's like, yeah. What do you need? What resources do you need? That makes sense to me. E-commerce does not make sense to me. And e-commerce may or may not make sense. It might be, who knows in this situation, but it was a fascinating conversation. And then to finish it out and get you guys' perspective on it, to finish it out, my conversation with this guy was, listen, this is, if you want to progress your career, take ownership of the customer journey. Like, make that your thing. Make building digital tools to help your customer do their job easier. Make that be your thing. You will rise through this company with that. If you make e-commerce your thing, you're done. I'm telling you. And you, by the way, you all your things could include e-commerce. I'm not saying it's not. But if you die on the dogma of e-commerce versus on the dogma of, okay, we're going to create digital tools that help your customers do their job easier, so that they naturally will be like, the easiest place to do my job is to do it here. And it's easier. Then they'll stay with you because it'll be easier than your competitors. And that may or may not include e-commerce. And it was a mind, I forget about that message sometimes so often. It was a mind-blowing conversation. It was a transformational conversation that happened within that company. It changed the whole trajectory, right? Mainly because like the CEO was like, he wasn't opposed to digital. He was opposed to like something that he didn't think made sense to them at the time. And there's probably lots of reasons why it didn't make sense.
Yeah, I think it goes into defining what is it that you want your digital experience to do, right? If you think of it as just e-commerce, for better or for worse, the first thing that people, particularly in the traditional business, think of is just it's order taking, right? So like, all right, an order pad. That's all we need to create. You just need a place where you can log in, type in my part numbers and quantity, and just get pricing and availability and place an order. And that's all you got to do. But to your point, Justin, if that is how you're defining e-commerce, is the ability to buy online, you're leaving the entirety of your offline sales differentiation off the table. You're leaving off education. You're leaving off consultative selling. You're leaving off services. You're scheduled delivery, blanket POs, all of the things that manufacturers and distributors offer to sweeten their value proposition beyond just the products that are being sold. Those are the kind of things that you've got to think about. How are we going to do those things online in addition to just taking an order? Otherwise you never close that, that journey gap between online and offline.
I think it's speed to human. There's an escalation, a way to capture and escalate the buyer behavior. So your definitions, what you just said about definitions is 100%. What is this designed to do? How is it supposed to help? And that needs to be mapped to the customer. First of all, you don't force the customer to do this. You see what the customer needs, and then you marry up your defined platforms to serve those needs. But if they want to go on and, to your point, do an order pad and take an order, the second there's a deviation from that at all, if they don't have a way to connect or answer their problem or get with an individual that can help with any nuance that happens, because a significant amount of those buys just don't happen. There's usually things and questions that need to be answered along the way. If you don't have that speed to escalation, to your point, those are your service identities. Those are the way you identify any peripheral opportunity in that buy cycle, period. That's your value add, and that is the customer experience that you're just not forcing a buyer down a path that they can't get out of.
Sam, would you call it speed to solving, speed to solution? Because whether or not it comes from a human or not, I don't know.
No, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
I
love the idea.
The human is the human element is where your platform stack doesn't answer questions, or you could be honest.
Mm-hmm. We don't have
a solution for this, so we're going to insert a human.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's covering all aspects of the buyer journey and eliminating problems. But if you call it speed to solution, speed to, I don't know if solution's the right answer though either.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like when I've talked, because I've talked about the journey gap a lot, right? The difference between the experience I have when I'm working with a company online versus the experience I have when I'm working with a company offline. And the moment that somebody, the moment I'm on a digital experience and I start trying to figure out a solution, the moment I hit friction, that's when I opt out, right? I'm like, this is too hard. I'm just going to pick up the phone and call my sales rep. This is the thing that B2B has as a problem that makes it really distinct, right? For me to go and buy something, like my process as a consumer, like if I go to Amazon and I can't find something, like now I have to like get in a car and go to the mall and try to find parking and try to go to the store that has what I need. Like it's a lot of work. It's a lot more work for me to find something offline as a consumer as it is online. So there's a certain stickiness that the online situation is going to have. But that's not the case in B2B for most companies. For most companies selling online, they've got an army of really good salespeople who they pay to be really good at solving problems, at adding value, at providing education. So like the moment I hit friction online, if I'm on a B2B site, screw it. I'm just going to pick up the phone and call. And that's a problem because not only does that, not solve the customer's problem quickly in the way that they want to solve it, which especially the younger buyers want it to be solved online, but it reinforces this illusion amongst leaders in B2B that people don't want to go online. People don't want to buy online because we're only at 3% adoption. Well, it's because the moment people hit a problem, they opt out and it just becomes a regular phone call. There's no link between that failed session online and that call to your salesperson.
Jay, do you have anything? I got another perspective, but Jay, if you got anything to add to that,
two things. First is to Jason's point. I think friction is the factor, right? So when you think about this concept of B2B merchandising, right, really a lot of it is about reducing friction, and particularly in the early stages of e-commerce or having an e-commerce site, the reality is that the friction is greater to try to get a customer to go online and do whatever it was they're used to doing offline, right? And so again, that's one of the main reasons we've got a marketing automation platform around that. So that I think that friction coefficient is always higher for the online than the offline. What you have to do is get to a point where online becomes where there's less friction, right? Then customers will adopt. Then customers will continue to use it. They'll continue to engage. The other thing is, if you're what you said early on, Justin, like we shouldn't be building e-commerce sites. We should be building digital transactional, intake forms for our customers, right? I mean, the reality is there's portals out there, but if you don't understand how your customers buy, if you don't understand what their process is internally, it becomes really difficult to engineer something online that's going to actually reduce that friction long term. So that's my opinion anyway.
You nailed where I wanted to go. It was, if you don't understand what their process is internally, there's a customer first attitude there around what is the buying experience for the customer? What system is that done in? How does your current solution fit into that system? Because put yourself in the buyer's shoes. I buy from, let's just say 7 different suppliers potentially. And it's much more than that. So I'm being very generous in 7. Mm-hmm. But I have to have 7 sites open. So, and I have to have 7 logins, 7 different experiences. And this is, again, I'm being very conservative of 7. Let's just probably realistically put that in 25 to 50 on a given day, depending on how big or large your organization is or the variety of products. But managing that is a nightmare. And you have both ordering, and so you might have contracts set up where you will always buy this part from this supplier. Okay. So now you're just hopping between those e-commerce sites potentially, or those order pads to make those acquisitions. But then you'll find within a given day something isn't perfect, that a supplier doesn't have that, and so you have to go to plan B. And this is where sourcing comes in. And now I got to go find it. And some people will have the next runner up. But in many cases, especially in MRO side, where it is unplanned and not thought of, you're going to find it. And you're just hoping that one of your main ones, and you'll gravitate towards the e-commerce site that you like the best, or that has the best product search functionality or whatever. You're now getting into that workflow escalation of, well, what happens in a non-perfect environment and I have to go source an item? Well, that now takes the buyer into a different workflow. And to your point, what you mentioned, Jay, what does that process look like? Well, if you don't map that out or understand what the customer is going through, you're potentially forcing that customer into a very painful experience. And the goal should be to get as close to their current process as possible and not even have it be where you're forcing them out of their current solution. If ideally, you're right in their platform, you're right in their system, you're right in their business, and you've integrated to that extent. You're not forcing them to jump out.
Mm-hmm. I think we had the biggest shift with this company was when I said you're both looking at this wrong. Like, because the head of e-commerce was like, they're not giving me the resources I need to go do what I need to do, right? And the CEO is like, they're not building the things that I think make sense for the. Not that he knew what should be built for the customer that should make sense, right? So when I went in there and I flipped them both on their heads and said, "You're both looking at this wrong," it changed the whole conversation. The head of e-commerce had never seen him in charge of the customer journey himself, in charge of the customer journey, and he had a realization. Oh, if I own this customer journey, I would be invited to the table every single time because every decision would be in the context of what the customer journey was, and I'd be able to speak on that, right? Mm-hmm. And he realized, oh, if this is an easy thing to point out, that in the customer journey, this is a moment that matters, and this is a negative moment that matters, so we've got to address it. So let's go put this in, and the whole company would get behind it because they're like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense that our customers are experiencing that, right? Mm-hmm. So he shifted, and then when we told the executive, listen, like, it's not his job to go build the strategy for this. It's your job. Like you and your CFO and your CIO and your CMO and your VP of supply chain, you all have to go create your digital strategies. This team is not responsible for that. They don't know that this team is responsible for coming behind you and optimizing and helping you build a better strategy, but not the initial strategy, because they, and for example, the CFO, there's, as we kind of walked through that, there was 10 things that the CFO in their digital strategy could be implementing, that if they own the digital strategy and own the creation of that, with the customer journey map as kind of the backdrop of it. I think so often we're quick to say it's one team or the other team that's failing this, when the reality is like, if we look at ourselves and what our team's doing and how we need to step up, it just takes on the conversation just hits a little bit differently.
Well, and I think you actually are, that story I think addresses something Sam and I have been spending a lot of time talking about lately, and that is what we've been calling the Great Divide, right? Like the communication gap between executives and the departmental e-commerce, right? Whoever's managing e-commerce, whether it's marketing, e-commerce department, IT, whatever. And that gap is a huge problem. It's creating funding gaps, as your story just highlights. It's creating knowledge gaps, right? Executives don't understand the technology, and I think practitioners. I think for I think for the most part, I think practitioners probably struggle to help executives understand that, and so that
it's limiting their career too.
Right. That gap is one of the big problems, really. And you've referred to it as change management over the years, stuff like that. But it's really that gap between the technology communication and the business communication that becomes really that's the problem. A lot of these other things are really symptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
Justin, in that conversation, was it clear who in that company owned the customer?
No.
Yeah. See, this is what I see a lot. And when I talk to people about career planning, because one of the questions is like, for a lot of B2B companies, e-commerce is sort of in its own silo, right? It's
correct.
It's kind of off on the side. It's an ancillary business until, at some point it flips and it's more than 50% of the transactions. Like, all right, fine. But people will ask, where do I go? Like, I'm running e-commerce. I don't have traditional. I'm not a sales guy, right? I'm not a CIO. I'm not like, where do I go? And I'll say, do you realize that one of the biggest opportunities for folks who work in digital, and who are running the digital business, is you have access to the single greatest asset to your company's long-term success, which is the clearest, highest resolution, most consistent pool of data about what your customers want from you than anybody in the company.
Yep.
So as you start to see, I am starting to see more titles now, like chief customer officer or director of customer experience roles. And I saw a number of folks at B2B Online with those kind of titles, which I think is fantastic, because customer experience or chief customer officer types of, as the folks who are most equipped to make assessments and judgments and strategic pivots about what we can do for the customer, to give them those services, to add that value, are going to be the people coming from the e-commerce background, because of, if nothing else, just the access to all of the data and the analytics and the tools to really understand what customers are trying to do.
The most successful person I've ever seen do this, I asked her, I probably won't say her name on this, but I asked her the question of, how did you get access to the customer online, offline? And she said, oh, that's an interesting question, because I think this is way different than anything you've heard of before. I was in charge of digital, and I came through the customer success organization. And so I owned, when I took over digital, they made me head of customer success and digital. And therefore I was able to do the customer journey for all of my job.
Right.
There was a digital component, offline component, a sales, a phone call component, a chat component. I was able to do that. I was able to do that whole thing, to own both offline and online. And so when I approached the executive team, they gave me a seat at the table because I really did own the customer journey. And they poured resources not into digital. They poured resources into improving the customer journey. And a lot of that happened to be creating digital tools.
Yeah.
Which I think is a fascinating response to it. I'll ask if I'm allowed to say her name on it. Insert it into here.
But it is absolutely, I think, a narrative that we're going to see more and more as companies mature digitally and kind of start to realize their powers.
It's a good coaching thing for people. I mean, I think we got to think of the people that are listening to this. I think, on the agency side, SI side, as you're consulting with people, I think I think this is an interesting model to, as people ask the question, where does e-commerce sit? It happens all the time, right? Does it sit in marketing? Does it sit in IT? That typically is the two places it sits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that I think there's a third, which is customer success, maybe even the most logical place for it to sit. And most digital leaders aren't comfortable with running customer success. They're only comfortable with running digital. So it's a real stretching opportunity to become the owner of the customer journey, because Jason, you asked the question, who owned it? Nobody owned it. Nobody owned it in the situation I was talking about, the career. And I think I think in most organizations that's the case. And so it's an opportunity for you to step in and own it.
Right. Because you're equipped, right? You've got access to all the tools, all the data, all the information.
You do.
You're distilling this massive pipeline of data about what your customers are looking for and what they're buying together and what they're not buying, what they're looking at and not considering. And it's all at your fingertips.
And you can, when you have customer conversations to sell this, many people have customer conversations to walk them through e-commerce or to do discovery. Mm-hmm. You can be doing deeper discovery on the deeper customer journey, not just the digital customer journey, which I think is pretty compelling.
Just as a objection, I don't think e-commerce should ever sit within IT.
Say more.
The technical teams within organizations, whether you're small or large, whether you're small and you're hiring that out to be managed, or whether you're large and you've built your own teams, the role of IT is to implement and to design and scale. But the business operation itself, the activity and the function, in my opinion, and I think there's probably a lot of good reason we could get into a deep conversation on, but needs to be removed from the technical strings. I think as you get larger, and e-commerce becomes a critical point in your business, you are required to have product ownership within IT to serve the business entity. But I don't think it's good practice at all to have the technical design implementation function own the direction.
Jay Schneider, what do you think about that?
I don't know that I have any direct experience with it, but I will say that I think
well, you do, because every project you've ever worked on,
right, is
IT's owned it.
Yeah. I guess it's an interesting take, and I am having difficulty disagreeing with it. I think that the challenge becomes in what we were just talking about, the customer journey, right? Who understands it? Who's responsible for it? And very rarely is that an IT function, right? And so from that perspective, I think a lot of IT departments, they're just not built for what it is that they need to be built for, to understand that customer journey and be able to deliver an experience that supports it, right? I think it's better if that journey is defined and someone can help IT understand what technology is going to be involved and what role they need to have in terms of supporting it. So I would say it that way, I guess. It's not a hard and fast rule. Just in my experience, I think that there's definitely some truth there.
Jason Hein jumping at the bit.
I think there is a hard and fast rule. I think the hard and fast rule is that the department that owns e-commerce needs to be the ones that own the same set of success criteria as they want to have the digital business have. So if your goal for managing your digital business is to maintain a 99.999% uptime and to have integrations run smoothly and to not have any sort of security issues, give it to IT. But if you want it to be something that improves your relationship with the customer, if you want it to be something that grows your sales and revenue, if you want it to be something that improves the profitability of your business, those are things that sales and or marketing are tasked with offline every day. Now, I do think, so I agree with Sam and with you, Jay, that like in general, when it comes to matching that alignment, sales and marketing and the business side is more equipped. But I have also been in enough situations where, where decisions are made without consulting IT until the very end.
Mm-hmm.
Uptime is important. Information security is important. Efficiency of integrations is important.
Mm-hmm.
So IT absolutely needs to have a seat at the table, not only during the selection, but they need to have regular conversations with the digital business. That is, and it can't be a conflict-based relationship. It has to be one where, hey, everybody's just trying to do the right thing for the customer.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like it just needs to be checks and balances. But I think that the business should own it.
I think, 7 years ago, we started this idea of the digital branch. And there's plenty of problems with the analogy to the digital branch. But one of the things that it did so well was it characterized the digital business as a business, right? As something to be thought of holistically, not as an e-store or an e-shop or a web store or a web shop, but a digital branch and everything that's included in the branch, right? Which is leadership and technology and procurement and fulfillment and customer service and answering all the different pieces. All the different pieces of it, and I can see both perspectives too. It's hard. I think by default all technology projects are done by IT. I think just by default it always gets put into IT because it's quote unquote technology, and all technology decisions are made by IT.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's right. It just means it is the default that always happens.
And that's why I want to make sure my statement is clear. The technical departments have a very clear role.
Yeah.
Jason, they have objectives and they have success criteria that can't be ignored organizationally, period. But in terms of strategically setting the direction as it aligns with the customer journey, the business modeling, and in interaction with other entities, i.e. sales or operations, etc. I think that has to be a business function, and that has to be at the table of business planning and design that aligns with the company's objectives. And then the technical teams are there for accountability, for insurance, assurance, and making the best mousetrap that to design that, to implement that strategy. And it's a good iron sharpens iron then. But the ownership, the direction, you has to be somebody that's leading the business design.
Let's transition. What what were some of your other takeaways from B2B online? For me, I was really, I was more in the vision casting of what we want to build inside the association. And so like everything for me was, this is the type, like thinking through and imagining and dreaming about the type of event that I wanted just to be excited about. And so I'm just curious on you guys' takeaway on not B2B online itself, but other takeaways that make sense to carry forward into, stuff that we're doing long term.
Jason, I'll let you go first.
Well, I was going to let you go first.
I'll go first.
I think the
we're also gracious.
We are. The one thing that I will compliment everybody involved with was how quickly, even just from, B2B Online Florida last fall, the talk about AI shifted to something that is much more practical than, I felt like last year the talk about AI was like, honestly, what all the talk about the internet was like 25 years ago, how it was going to it was going to cure, it was going to do everything. It's going to we're not going to have inside salespeople, and we're going to get rid of all these people, and it's going to be so efficient. It's going to be like magic. Well, I don't know what happened, but somewhere in the last 6 months, people just felt like they started thinking about it more realistically, that, it can do a lot of really interesting things, but to expect any of that to happen in isolation of human review and involvement, I don't think I'm giving away too much to say that Justin and I have been engaged in a noble experiment that involves the use of generative AI that I'm still super excited about. But it's like, it's tricky to get everything to work just in the way you wanted it. So, whether it was a number of sessions that I heard, the topic of AI would come up, and everybody like, yeah, it's interesting, but we're having to review it, or we've got processes in place to edit. And it was such a refreshing breath of practical realism after sort of the, hyperbolic kind of dream talk of the last year. I'm very pleased that as an industry, we sort of felt like we got our feet back underneath us and are like, yep, this is something that we're going to be doing, but it's less about all powerful magic and more about trying to figure out specific use cases that are, understood, well scoped, well defined, and now we're executing tactically in conjunction with people. I thought that was great.
Well, that's because it's forcing everybody to understand their workflows or their
good point.
Their logic.
Very good point. Yeah.
And the experience over the last 12 months, let's just say, myself included, how am I using this thing? All of a sudden you realize very quickly, all right, I'm not using this to fix all my problems, but I found that it can help me in certain areas of my problems. Mm-hmm. And so I map that out, and I'm now finding wins within my workflows that I can adopt to this and make immediate little wins. Nick Pericle is a genius at this, and helping connect to the possibilities within workflows that AI can help with. And this, if you shout out to him in terms of, watch his stuff, because he helps make it more tangible. And, but it's experientially, I think, the first 6 months was a disaster probably for most. And then now the last 6 months has been, to your point, the reality of, nope, this is where I'm seeing the success. It's in smaller, bite-sized, scalable issues that had a lot of labor or a lot of tediousness to it that we've found it can offset.
I felt like just being down there for the one day that I was, and just in general lately, I'm feeling like there's a opportunity, responsibility, maybe even. You know, B2B is B2B is coming along, and it's for many of these vendors, it's now, you know, the primary target for many of them, and I think the opportunity to just help practitioners and executives really try to solve some of these problems. I think you know, that's a good opportunity. That's a good mission for us as we look towards, you know, Scottsdale and other things that we're doing. I just think that the opportunity, the time's really right for it, and I think, you know, in a sense, I almost feel responsible for, you know, having to think that through and doing whatever we can to help the community in terms of information sharing, in terms of practices, processes, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, and interaction too. That's always the thing with these events. We can talk about you know, what happens in the session or what happens on the exhibit, on the expo floor or whatever. But so much of these events is about the interaction between people.
We're gonna do Brett and I are gonna do after IRX. We're doing a Q&A session where I'm gonna ask him. We're gonna ask each other lots of questions about, you know, what we're doing, and I think from a content perspective, it's one thing. First of all, I just think B2B Online executed really, really well. I just feel like it was like I felt it was impactful. The sessions I was in were great, especially the keynote sessions where everybody was together were amazing. Really well done. Great vendor participation. I started, for me, I was doing a lot of dreaming about culture, and I've written about it this week, but the culture being, because of how early this is, what an opportunity, Jay, you called it responsibility and opportunity that we have to build a culture that we want to build. And I'll give you the example. So Jason and I were talking about this, and then a guy came over to Jason and I, and Jason stopped the guy and said, and introduced the guy to me like this, something like this. He's like, without ever using the guy's company name, Jason said, hey, his name was Don, I think. Don's the kind of guy that, you know, mixes artistry and I don't even remember exactly how he said it, but he's like, Don's the type of guy that does this and creatively solves problems in this way. And he never talked about the company he was with. He was describing Don in an intimate way. First of all, there was a level of intimacy that Jason knew him, but I actually had to run, which I actually felt bad about, or got distracted. But had I continued sitting there talking to Don, there was so much for me to talk to about what Jason said about him. And Jason did that very intentionally in that conversation, based on the conversation that he and I were having, to describe him that way. But it was the model for how the type of culture that I want here. I want a place where like no one should be walking around by themselves. Like, you know, people walking up to people and introducing and say, hey, like, tell me about yourself, and less about your company. Tell me about yourself, like your story. What are you passionate about? And then bring in, hey, Jeremy, come meet this guy or this woman. You know, she's all about this and this, and you really like this and this, and you guys have so much to talk about here. And this culture that we actually have the opportunity. This is the crazy cool thing. We actually have the opportunity to build this culture, not in the association, but in the entire industry, like, and to be a place where everybody wants to break into our space because of the type of culture that we have, because we're the type of place. I mean, imagine going to an event and meeting 10 people right away, and then, you know, meeting another 10 people because that group gets bigger, and knowing each other a little past our companies and what we do, and some level of intimacy there. That's where great business will be done. Mm-hmm. Like that's where the best business will be done. When you're sitting across the table from someone that you know, and you're having a, very honest and transparent conversation about what you're both trying to get out of a deal. I mean, that's where the best types of business is done. And I walked away from there just so excited, because it wasn't past. We aren't at the top of we're not at the top of the peak. We're just starting on the peak, which means we all have this opportunity to build this the way we want to build it. Right. And and also there's small things like, Jay, instead of having to, like not being exclusionary too, so that some people can't be there and some people are allowed to be there, other people can't be there. Mm-hmm. Right. So that we can all be there participating. And one last thought was, and I think I mentioned this to you, Jason, but imagine a place where everybody's listening, everybody's in the same keynote. So what happens at B2B Online is the practitioners hang out in the keynote and the vendors all hang out in the vendor hall. Mm-hmm. Right. And so when they come together, there's no conversation about commonality, right? Or about the message that we just heard, or I agree with it, I disagree with it. Like, it doesn't matter. You don't have to agree with it. The best points are to debate it and talk about it and understand it and what resonated with you. Well, this is what resonated with me. And does this resonate with you? And you actually have conversations about the topics that we're all discussing. And I just had this kind of vision of coffee networking times when we're all like hyped up talking about 2 or 3 things. Like everybody's talking about 2 or 3 things. Mm-hmm. Right. And that allows us to get to know each other a little better too, and opens the door to other better conversations. And I just had a very clear vision for the industry itself. And if we do this right, we can be the industry that everybody wants to get into, right? And everybody wants to model. That B2C events will want to model after what we're doing in B2B, because like of how it feels when you go in there. Like when you walk in, like it just feels different, right? It feels welcoming and inviting instead of just kind of walking around kind of aimlessly. Mm-hmm. And I just got really excited about it because it's something we can do. Like, yeah, it's something actually achievable. It doesn't matter how many people are there. Like if there's 100 people there, we can achieve it. And there's 500 people there, we can achieve it. If there's 1,000 people there, we can achieve it. Right. Mm-hmm. Cause that really is not about necessarily like programming as much as it is about the kind of the culture. And one last thing, cause I was on a rant. It's been heavy on my mind.
You're on a roll, Justin. You're on a roll.
On a roll. Educating the entire market about how important it is for all of us to get to know each other. that it's really important for practitioners to get to know vendors, even if they don't have a project for that vendor. It's really important for vendors to get to know practitioners, even if they don't have a project available at that moment. Because first of all, this is a moving industry, right? People are moving to different positions and moving to different locations and doing different things, different companies, different departments. And like as we learn, like education will transform everything, right? As we get to learn more and understand more and know more, like it'll change things. Whose cat is in the background?
It's time for the cat to get fed.
You know whose cat that is. Charlie, the B2B business cat.
Nice.
He's upset that he's not able to express his opinions here today.
I think he was affirming what you were saying.
Yeah,
he was putting the fur in.
Preach
affirming.
it.
Yes,
he was saying, "Preach it, Justin."
Yes.
No, I walked away from it just unbelievably energized and energized that there's so much room in the market for other events that are in that don't have to be competitive. They can be tangential to it, and I'm really excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think
I have major FOMO because I wasn't there, so you guys keep rubbing it in here. But I do have one question, because within the registration process, is there any option for me as a manufacturer, distributor, practitioner, whoever, or even as a vendor, agency, consultant, whatever, to highlight my interests or highlight my what I'm looking? Why am I coming there, and what do I want to get out of it?
Yeah.
It goes back to our last episode with Jason Greenwood talking about the speed dating concept.
Yep.
And I'm not necessarily saying it has to be like that, but something where at least I can get into a peer group of people that talk about the things I want to talk about, and I have an ability to connect, to your point, whether it's a vendor, whether it's a manufacturer or somebody else, a peer that has something of the same type of nature. I want to get with them to talk through it.
The irony.
Yeah, what I had decided before walking into B2B Line, and then it became crystal clear this is absolutely the way to do it. Like, we will not have company names on badges. We will not have distinctions between a red card's a vendor, blue card's a practitioner. We won't have company names on. So jokingly, that means we can't judge someone based off of their company name, whether they're worthy or unworthy for us to talk to on any side, right? We'll be able to judge based off of other things now, like how we're dressed or height and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I prefer height.
But I think, of course, I prefer lack of hair.
Lack of hair.
Mm-hmm.
There'll
Cool glasses.
Be large consensus for that.
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah made the suggestion, why don't we put interests on the card or in the app, have a way for us to indicate these are things we want to learn about or know about or connect about, what it might be, whether it's on the name card or other places. And Jason, you came up with some suggestions about vendors actually putting some indicators of that as well.
Well, no, it was everybody putting, like, instead of having where your company name and whether you're a speaker or distributor on the badge, you just have little I was originally thinking we could print icons like, what are you interested in talking about? I need to talk about payments, or I want to talk to people about search, or I want to talk to people about platforms or content. It could even be as simple as, like, you go to registration and then you, like, right next to it, there's a big wall of stickers. And depending on what you want to talk to people about, whether you're a seller and you want to sell people these things, or you're a buyer and you want to buy these things, or you're just curious, you just grab the stickers, put them on your badge, and the people will learn to self-match.
Or pins. We could, how they do pins. We
could have 37 pieces of flair on our lanyards.
Like Boy Scouts,
right, exactly. Exactly.
Got my fire starting badge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, and that also, and I think you did draw a correlation to this, Jason, to vendors and their booths too, of saying, here are things that we can have a discussion about at our booth that makes sense, right? Instead of necessarily technology, here's some kind of problems that we can talk about.
Right. Why should you come and talk to us? Right. Just having your name on a backdrop somewhere. Because I did see a few vendors at B2B Online where it was just literally their company name and, like, a nice little graphic. Yep. I'm like, there's so many different things. Like, and I think that hurts their ability to draw people, because if I don't know what you do, I'm not as a practitioner walking the floor going to go and talk to every single booth to find out, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Now, should I? I think that's a fair statement. If I had all the time in the world, I would go to talk to everybody in that vendor booth and understand by the end of the conference exactly what they do, exactly how they're differentiated, exactly the kind of problems they're going to solve, so that I can figure out who I'm going to prioritize.
So you can map it.
so I can map it.
Yeah.
But that's not realistic. So everybody, I think, can get their little badge on what do they want to talk to people about? Who do they want to network with? People who are interested in this. But the vendors could do themselves a huge service by just, in their sign above the thing, 3 bullet points. What kind of things do you solve better than anyone right now?
Mm-hmm.
To complement that, I've been at shows in the past that it wouldn't be a vendor, but it would be a destination for a topic, and you might have a few different players. So
love that.
And if tariffs is a big
product content zone,
compliance, regulated
e-commerce software platform zone, the tariff zone. Yeah, I love that, Sam.
Logistics, e-com, but it can get. You have to thoughtfully think through.
No, but you have like reverse logistics and digital supply chain. I mean, there's so many aspects of this.
Yep.
That's where collecting at registration.
Yeah.
You use that data to ultimately predict where.
Well, and that's what B2B Connect does. To be fair, the B2B Connect events in June that WBR puts on, you have to fill out basically a survey on like what are the things that you are here to learn about, and then they actually have like a matching platform that helps you set up little half an hour one-on-one meetings with people. It's honestly, I think, a really great compliment, and I'm glad that they do it after B2B Online, because I think the nice thing about B2B Online Chicago is it does provide a platform where people can kind of go and just kind of kick the tires and figure out like what are the things we might want to do next year, right? Because at this point it's May, right? Like nobody's trying to figure out budgets for this year yet. Everybody's trying to think about like planning for next year's budget. So B2B Online Chicago being in April and May is a good time to kind of like start thinking about what do we want to think about for next year? And then they kind of get some questions. They go to B2B Connect and they're able to like, have one-on-one meetings with people who can solve these particular problems. And that then, so they're able to then have the summer to, go on vacation because we're in B2B and that's what we do in the summer. But then in like September, October, when budgets are being framed, this is sort of, now we've got a baseline of understanding and we've had deep conversations with people. And, we had deep conversations with people to figure out who are the handful we want to like have more talks with. That those talks continue over the summer. The decision gets made and like, okay, great. Now we're having budget ready for it for Q1.
I'm just really excited about it. I came away very energized for the whole thing.
Agreed.
More than anything else. And also like pretty certain on the vision too of industry wide, like that we can actually have an effect on a full industry of people.
Yeah.
Helping people like do career progression, figure out solutions to their problems, move to different jobs, launch new careers, educate the new people that are coming in that have never been a part of this,
across the spectrum of maturity too. Yeah, I think that's the other important thing.
Absolutely.
Right. There are a lot of folks out there just trying to figure out, they're just trying to get their feet underneath them.
Yeah,
that's
and
right.
It can be very, very intimidating to look at some of those presentations from the leaders and go like, holy crap, we have so far to go.
Yeah.
And what we're doing here, I think, is the best way for those folks to accelerate in a way where they don't have to learn by failure in the way that the leaders had to when I was, back when I was young.
Back then, just a couple of years ago.
Oh, God. Been doing this a long time.
I turned 50 at B2B Online this year.
Oh, that's right. Happy birthday.
That was
great birthday.
Happy birthday. I was traveling on my birthday.
Between the two of us, we have 100. We have 100 years.
Jeez.
Now, a century of B2B e-commerce experience. I started when I was born. I don't know about you.
I started when I was born too.
Yeah, I started in the 70s. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys. Appreciate you being here.
Appreciate you having us.
Yeah.